Hey, it's Nancy. Before we begin today, I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Crime Beat early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. As a crime reporter, I get to know a lot of police investigators from a lot of different units, from sex crimes to guns and gangs, and of course, homicide. In this episode, one of those officers, a veteran investigator, shares behind-the-scenes details about some of the most high-profile cases I've covered and opens up about the impact these cases have had on his own life.
Yeah, I still suffer because of it. The lost sleep that that I'll never get back because of the images that are ingrained in my soul. I've seen things, as my cohorts have, that the rest of society should never have to look at. And that's just part of the job, that you have to learn how to deal with that.
I'm Nancy Hixt, a crime reporter for Global News. Today, on Crime Beat, a special conversation with retired homicide detective Tom Barrow. Thanks so much for coming in.
You're welcome, Nancy.
So people will know you, people who've listened to Crime Beat previously. You've joined us for one of our episodes, and you're going to be on several other episodes in the future. But we want to give you people some of the background, some of the stuff that they've always wanted to know from a homicide detective. And because you're retired, I feel like you can say things a little more freely than somebody who's currently working.
Sure.
What was the reason why you became a police officer in the first place?
To tell you the truth, I didn't set off to be a police officer. I actually wanted to be a dentist, if you can imagine that. And then in the late 80s, it was very competitive. I was going to school. I was doing my best, but the writing was on the wall. I wasn't going to be a doctor or a dentist, and I started looking for other career paths. And I just kind of fell naturally into the police world. I had a lot of really good mentors, guys that maybe were a little younger than my dad, who kept pushing me in that direction. And I was very fortunate. I got on at a very young age, and I was happy that I did. I finished my degree and had a very rewarding and successful career.
So having your father be a police officer before you, and he was involved in a lot of high-profile cases, was that a bit of an inspiration to you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was very interesting work. I always looked up to my father and his coworkers as a child and as a teenager looking up. They always seemed to be bigger and did things better, and I had that awe about the profession, and like I said, it really wasn't where I was heading. But as I got older, it started to inspire me more and more. And when I finally decided to take that turn, it was an easy fit because I knew what the job was all about. I knew the stresses and the strains that it puts on a relationship and a family, and I think I was well prepared for that aspect of it, and I took to it like it was second nature.
I think it's interesting that your dad was actually involved in some of the cases that were high profile when I was growing up as well, and he was kind of on the cutting edge of a lot of new things. So I did want to ask you about that, because he worked on the Kelly Cook case, which anybody who's listened to previous episodes knows there's a series that I did in season 1 of Crime Beat. Yes.
Yeah. My dad, my father was involved with investigative hypnosis. Not only was he a polygraphist, but he was a hypnotist, and not like the cruise ship variety. There's a lot of value to being able to relax to the point of being able to remember details of things that are in your memory and being able to bring that forward. And he did some really cutting edge stuff for the 1980s.
So I know a lot of our listeners will be wanting to know kind of a lot of the different things on how you did your job as a homicide detective. But just before we get into that, I thought it's an interesting fun fact to point out that I met you before I even fully became a journalist. Like, I had just graduated from high school and I was already accepted into broadcasting school, but I hadn't started yet. And I was volunteering for whoever would take me to try to get some experience. And at that time, I was a volunteer for Shaw TV. And I met you because you were a contestant in the Calgary Police Rodeo.
Absolutely. Yeah. In 1994, I won my first all-around buckle, and you interviewed me. And somewhere in my archives, I still have a copy of that.
I'm scared to even think about how bad that was because I hadn't even gone to school yet. And I had no idea, really, that I would end up dealing with a lot of the officers that I interviewed that day.
Absolutely, yeah. There would have been a lot of us. Some of the guys more senior to me were major crimes investigators. Some of my rodeo mentors were also good police mentors. The Calgary Police Rodeo has a very prominent place in my heart. I was involved, probably since I met my wife at a police rodeo in 1991. And I sat on the board until I think about 2007.
And then met your favorite crime reporter in 94.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about how you balance your work life when you're a homicide detective with home life and how the two of them kind of meet in the middle and how your family deals with, you being on call. And I know there's probably a reason why after 25 years you chose to retire because it can take a toll on you.
Oh, yeah. I think the best way to answer that is I had the love of a good woman.
I think it's really interesting because I think people have a mental picture of what a homicide detective would be like. And I think they picture, this hard-nosed, guy who would never let anything make him feel emotions. But from my experience in the homicide detectives that I've met, you guys are kind of the opposite of that. And you guys are human. You feel emotions. And I know when you talk about your family, it's an emotional thing.
Yeah, you bet. You look at the characters that are on TV, and that's, a nice way to think about it, but it really isn't. Most of the guys that I work closely with were good family people. The police service, policing in general has a history and a reputation for marital breakdowns, but it seemed that a lot of the guys that I work with are lifers, right? They're still on their first marriages and their first families, and that's I think that's a testament to who they are and their ability to not only do the work but balance that home life. And you really need a partner at home who understands what the job is about and is willing to support you in it. I was very blessed. I still am, but my wife understood the importance of the job. And when I would get the call at 2 o'clock in the morning and I'd be gone, and sometimes she wouldn't see me for 2 or 3 days. I'd be, sleeping in the utility room at the office, or if I did come home, it was to grab a 2-hour nap and then a shower and a clean suit, and away I'd go again. So I always tried to make my kids' events, if they had a soccer game or if they had a recital, a performance. My 3 daughters mean the world to me, and I didn't want to miss it, but I also recognized the importance of the work that I was chosen to do.
A lot of times for these episodes, I will talk to the primary investigator, including you, on some cases, but I think it's also important to note that it's not just that investigator working on a specific file. So a lot of the episodes that I've covered, probably most of them, you've touched in some capacity because you guys all work together. There's 2 teams at the Calgary Police Service homicide unit, and you work very closely on a lot of the cases. Talk about the team effort that goes into this and what it's like to be a part of that team. Some of the best
times when I was in the homicide unit were working as a team. In the boardroom, outside the homicide offices, we have a boardroom, and we would come together and brainstorm. And you're in there, and everybody's got a task. And we use something called the major case management triangle. And you've got a primary investigator on one tip of the triangle. And then you've got your file manager, and you've also got your affiant on the other corners. But underneath there are field investigators. And we all flow through those different responsibilities. One time you get tasked to go and do neighborhood inquiries. The next time you're doing a video canvas, or you're working with Calgary Search and Rescue. It's really a team effort. I know in your shows you do talk to the primary, but the primary is the point of the spear. But the rest of us are right there with them, helping. Oftentimes, there's multiple homicides going on in a series or in a row. They may be related, but on a busy weekend, you can have 5 different events that require the homicide unit. Whether it's a shooting where somebody looks like they might die. You might have a suspicious suicide that has to be looked at by the homicide unit. Everybody comes together and has a role. You get the primary, and then everybody else is out doing stuff, and you're juggling. You're putting different hats on all weekend long into the next week, and away you go. And the guys all pull for each other. If you need help, you ask for it. I can't ever remember being told no. They just come together.
And I know that you listen to a lot of the different episodes that we do, and some of these actually bring back memories for you because you were involved. And I remember talking to you at one point, I believe at court, just dealing with the Alex Radita case. And that one really stood out in your mind as something because you were there investigating.
I was the first investigator on that scene. There were first responders there, but because of the location, I think in the episode they talk about one of the guys.
Detective Matt DeMarino in the episode talks about the senior officer who came back to report what you had seen when you went to the scene.
I've never seen anything like it. In this case, there was one detective who lived near the scene, and instead of, coming into the office, he just phoned in and said, "I live near there. I'll stop at the scene and I'll hook up with you guys later." And he did that. And this is a 25-year guy with 5 years experience in homicide. And he showed up a couple of hours later, and he was stuttering. He wasn't speaking in complete sentences. And it was weird for such a seasoned guy. And then he put that picture of Alex up in the TV in the boardroom, and my jaw dropped. Like I had never seen anything like that before.
That was me. Because of the location and where I lived, it was the scene was actually on my way into the office. So oftentimes, if somebody was coming in and coming right by the scene, we've sent an investigator out. In that particular case, it was me. And when I walked in, I was the first investigator on scene. And when I walked into that room, it floored me. I had never seen anything like that in my life other than in photographs of genocide type photographs. And I took a picture and I sent it back to the primary, who was Matt, for the boardroom, so that people would understand what I was seeing, what we were looking at. This wasn't a case of a medical, like an
it wasn't a medical emergency.
This was something bigger and more sinister than I had ever seen with a child in a family situation. I still suffer because of it. The lost sleep that that I'll never get back because of the images that are ingrained in my soul. I've seen things, as my cohorts have, that the rest of society should never have to look at. And that's just part of the job, that you have to learn how to deal with that.
And how do you deal with that? Is that part of something that you would kind of debrief with your wife at the end of the day, just so that you get that off your chest?
Yeah, without, I don't think I never like to bring home the details, but having somebody to talk to at the end of the day, having a good support network, having faith, it all helps you get through the day.
When you listened to that episode, there was the conversation with Alex. Had you heard that audio previously?
No, I had not. So my role, I wrote a lot of the initial warrants to bring the written documentation back from BC. That was my role. So I did see some of the writings about what had happened to Alex, but I'd never heard his voice.
You were in a hospital? And why were you in a hospital?
Because I got too sick.
And how did you get too sick? What were you sick with, do you know?
My mom and dad were giving me the wrong stuff.
They were giving you the wrong stuff? How do you know they were giving you the wrong stuff?
Because that makes you sick.
That makes you sick?
And that makes you barf.
It makes you barf?
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen with your insulin when you go home? If you go home to mom and dad?
Well, I'm just gonna tell them to give me the right food.
You're going to tell them to give you the right foods? And what about the insulin?
Insulin, blood.
Insulin and blood? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Alex. Have you got any questions for me?
No.
No.
And how did you feel when you heard that?
How to put that in words? Like, it's, I had a front row seat to the whole thing. I was there at search warrants. I was there when they were arrested. How in this millennium can parents be so short-sighted and so close-minded that they would do this to their child? It was beyond reason, and they had been through it before. They had taken him to the brink of death once before, and were educated. Okay, now things should be better. But the fact that they picked up, they hid, they did it again to him. I think the verdict that they received is a just verdict in this particular case.
Are there other cases that really stand out in your mind that just, that they kind of just haunt you to this day?
The ones involving children. I dealt with a lot of organized crime related, gang, drug related, and those ones, especially young people, are tough to take, but, a lot of them put themselves in that situation. But when it involved innocent children, those ones haunt you. They stick with you You can never quite shake those images, especially as a father of 3 daughters myself. I can't imagine a parent losing a child, let alone somehow being involved in their murder.
I know having 3 daughters, and they were a little bit younger at the time that you were investigating the death of Brittany McInnes, but that had to have been a really tough one for you.
Yeah, it was. It was my first as a primary in the unit.
This is a clip from the story of Brittany McInnes, the concrete angel.
I just can't imagine the place where you're supposed to feel the safest in your home, with the people who are supposed to make you safe, doing something like this to you.
Barrow said the autopsy made it clear Brittany had been murdered.
The body speaks volumes in an autopsy like this. What had happened to her, the fight that she had, her fingernails were ripped, so she had DNA underneath her fingernails. Some of her fingernails were ripped off, so she had obviously tried to claw her way to safety. She was strangled. The belt from her robe was used as a ligature around her neck.
Brittany had fought for her life. And there was more. The 17-year-old girl had been raped.
I had 3 young daughters of my own at the time. They were a little younger than Brittany and her sister, but as we went through trial, they're moving towards that age, and now as I've retired and I have my middle one is right in that age group right now, and I look at her and she's just, so innocent and has her whole world in front of her. It's hard to imagine that somebody, a family member, could do something like.
No, it's okay. Just take a minute. It's like, and this is years later, and it's still like, I can tell that obviously it does. It takes a toll on your life. And every time we're talking about one of these cases, it kind of just brings you right back. One of the questions that I'm actually curious about is when you're dealing with a case like Brittany's and you have to deal with the accused, how do you maintain that professional investigator stance? Because you obviously see what he's done and what he's confessed to have done.
Professional. You need to maintain that professionalism, and you go in there with an understanding that the end goal is a confession, is a conviction. It's putting this guy behind bars, and your personal feelings have to take a back seat, because if you let them slip out, you're not going to do it right. You're not going to get the end goal.
I wonder if almost years later when we're talking about it, it's almost like you're more emotional about it now because you couldn't be emotional about it then. Some
of them, absolutely. Some of the cases, there's some that hit me. Probably the best example was the DeGroot, the 5 young people that were killed in Brentwood, and that one hit me at the time. I had a very difficult time holding that one in, probably because of the magnitude.
It is a horrific tragedy that has rocked the University of Calgary and our entire city and left many asking why. 5 young lives have been cut short in a mass stabbing at a house party in Brentwood, the worst in our city's history. The NewsHour's Nancy Hixt is live outside the home on Butler Crescent with the very latest. Nancy?
The suspect, 22-year-old Matthew DeGrood, is still under watch at the Rocky View Hospital at this hour. He is now charged in the worst mass murder in the city's history. He is officially charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder.
We have never seen 5 people killed by an individual at one scene.
DeGrood is the son of a 33-year veteran police officer and identified as the only suspect in the case.
Again, that one was on my way in. I was the first investigator on scene, relaying real-time information back to the boardroom for the homicide investigators that were gathering there. So I was on scene. 2 of the deceased had been taken to the hospital in an effort to save them, and I was actually on the telephone with the medical examiner's investigator when I put it together that first we went to 4, and then she was going to check on the 5th, and when she told me that 5th, not realizing that there were 3 on the scene.
Matthew DeGrood sat quietly, his hands and feet shackled, as he appeared in person in court for the first time since he was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. The 22-year-old faced a packed courtroom. Emotional family and friends of the young people he's accused of killing watched him closely. 5 people were murdered at a house party in Brentwood back on April 15th. Lawrence Hong, Josh Hunter, Katie Paris, Zachariah Rathwell, and Jordan Segura were all stabbed to death.
And that isn't a case that I'm actually working with the victims' families on right now. So that will be, one of the series that we release on Crime Beat in the next little while. So for sure, we'll give more information about that case. But the impact and the ripple effect that case has had, I mean, it stays till this day. Everybody who that case touched, the families, and just a devastating impact. So you've been retired for a couple of years now. You actually would have just hit your 30th anniversary if you were still with CPS, but you retired a couple of years ago. But when you left, I know there was a couple cases that you were working on tirelessly. What happened to those cases?
Well, those files, I did as much as I could, and then it was handed off to my teammates.
One of those cases is the death of a little girl in Calgary, and that's a case that you and I are working on an episode about for a future Crime Beat episode.
Baby Elizabeth Velasquez suffered 2 broken arms and 2 broken legs before she was murdered at just 14 months old. Homicide investigators revealed she died of asphyxia.
How difficult is that to walk away knowing that you've worked on it and, you're very close to perhaps bringing somebody to justice in this case, but, you're retired.
There wasn't enough evidence to present at trial, but I know, and the courts also know, based on some other things that have transpired, who was responsible for that baby's death. It always remains an open file.
Is there a hope, though, in doing something, in kind of bringing that case to the forefront and talking to me for this podcast, that perhaps that could lead to charges being laid in that case?
Absolutely. You never know who somebody has confessed to, that there may be evidence out there that just hasn't come forward yet.
One of the techniques used by police in a lot of major crimes investigations in Canada is what's referred to as a Mr. Big sting operation. I've talked about this tactic before in previous episodes of Crime Beat. You'll remember this is the technique that was used in the Mika Jordan case and in Lisa Mitchell's case. Police officers create very realistic scenarios to try to get suspects to confess to undercover officers. There are strict rules police have to follow. In 2014, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that confessions extracted through Mr. Big police sting operations tend to produce unreliable confessions and are open to abuse. They are presumed inadmissible in court.
I have been around since the start of the formalized Mr. Big scenarios here in the city of Calgary. And I've kind of watched the development of it, and I really got to give our people credit. They've been creative, and they've stepped away from what is the traditional Mr. Big, and they get it in a different way. And I don't really want to talk about the technique specifically, but just that every time we get a little bit more creative, there's another decision or roadblock that is put in our way. But I still see it as being a valuable tool, and the guys and gals that are out there will do a darn good job of figuring their way through those investigative hurdles in order to continue to use the technique or what evolves into a new technique.
Your dad set the bar for thinking outside the box when it came to new investigative techniques. And over the past 30 years since you first became an officer, a lot has changed, from DNA evidence to the advent of social media. In your opinion, how has that affected police investigations? As I kind of made my way through both the organized crime murders and then into homicide, social media blew up, right? It was MySpace when we started, and then by the time I retired, we had many platforms, and an investigator needs to have such computer savvy now. Like I referenced my father and his era, and if he could see the kind of investigations that we do today compared to the grind work that they used to do, the knocking on doors and talking to people. Sometimes I think that's becoming a lost art. There's still value out there to doing that, but so much of our investigation now goes through the computer. Even CCTV, look at the value of the fact that there's cameras on almost every house, on every block, on every business. Like if you're going to do something, there's a good chance you're going to get caught on camera. Absolutely. And if it's not there, it's at a traffic camera leaving the area. It's at a convenience store that you passed by, and you're only limited to the scope that you open up and look. And that's where that team comes back in. You need resources, and a 6-7 man homicide team needs to be supported by the street personnel and detectives from other areas now. There's just so much work to be done in any serious event. One of the cases that stands out to me where investigators used pretty much every technique possible, from neighborhood inquiries and door knocking to gathering CCTV evidence to the use of multiple forensic experts and DNA evidence, is the case of 5-year-old Nathan O'Brien and his grandparents Alvin and Kathy Lickness.
The Crown called Garland an obsessive and methodical planner who deliberately killed Nathan, Alvin, and Kathy. Court heard the 3 individuals were violently removed from their beds, taken to the Garland farm, and killed. Their bodies were burned in a large burn barrel with only tiny fragments of flesh left for police to discover.
I still remember the day that the officer who obtained the video in the neighborhood and was going through the video found the truck that was linked to that, and the power that had to further the investigation, and the energy that it created within the group when we're all trying to pull in that direction, and now we've got something tangible, something that we can link to that homicide scene. It's very powerful. That case specifically had more officers involved and more manpower than it probably set a record. How much does that case stand out to you in your career? The investigators on that, I tip my hat to them every time I see them. the two leads on that did an amazing job, but you're absolutely right as to how many people rallied for that event. It would really be interesting to count the number of officers that submitted their notes in some way, shape, or form on that homicide. It would be hundreds and maybe even 1,000 people would have touched that in some respect. Like, there was so much done for that file.
And likely just so much emotion. I mean, I think everyone, and myself included, everyone was very emotionally invested because, for some time it remained an Amber Alert.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it comes back to children. The grandparents, my heart breaks for them. I get it. But add a child into it, and the Amber Alert, and the not knowing where these people are, fearing the worst but hoping for the best, and then trying to piece it together. Anytime you have a child, you look at all the child murders that have happened over the course of 10, 15, 30 years. You look at each and every one of them. They leave a hole in the soul of the city, right? You've got, we have all have children somewhere in our lives, and you want to keep them safe.
I know earlier you talked about that these cases always stick with you. So years later, you're retired, but how do you, because I don't think those memories go away. How do you still deal with that?
That's a good question. I suffer from sleep deprivation. I cannot remember the last time I slept past 5:30 in the morning. Even if I was to stay up till 3 a.m., I wake up. There's something in my rhythm that I don't sleep. My wife gets annoyed because I get up and I'm fortunate that I can work on my own schedule, and I usually start quite early in the day, but weekends included, I'm up. I get up mostly because I don't like the images that go through my mind. It kind of flows to that low point, looking for a way out, I guess. So I get up and just do something else to get my mind away from it. I don't, in my waking hours, I don't stew about it. I don't think about it. But if I'm laying there, that's where my mind goes, and that's probably the disease. And like you say, I think a lot of people deal with it, diagnosed or undiagnosed. I don't think that it's anything that I can't handle by myself or with the help of my family. But it certainly makes me tired in the evening. It's tough to get through a West Coast hockey game these days. Yeah, there's a balance to it. Although I retired, I continue to work. So there's lots to stay focused on outside of letting the demons crawl into your head.
And I think once an investigator, probably always an investigator. So even though you're retired, you're still working full time and in a different capacity, though, as an investigator. Just tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, I've been doing corporate security investigations for a financial institution for the last couple of years. I do some private investigative work. I do some legwork for lawyers that require my expertise. I really enjoy the death investigation still. It's, I kind of get drawn back to it because it's a skill set that not a lot of people have. Once you've been through the homicide world for a number of years, there's a skill set that you have and an understanding of what it takes to investigate a a serious event, such as like an occupational health death or an accident death, and I do enjoy adding my expertise to those investigations.
We'll be having you back to talk about several high-profile cases that you were a part of and hugely instrumental in. So thank you so much.
I look forward to it.
Thank you to Tom Barrow for coming in and being so open and sharing some special insight into these cases and giving us a look at the life of a homicide detective. And thank you for listening. If this is your first time checking out Crime Beat, please take the time to listen to the other stories I've shared, including the ones I've shared in this episode. And make sure you subscribe to the show so you don't miss the upcoming episodes Tom and I discussed. I would love to have you give our show a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Crime Beat is written and produced by me, Nancy Hixt, with producer Dila Velasquez. Audio editing and sound design is by Rob Johnston. Special thanks to photographer-editor Danny Lantella for his work on this episode, and thanks to Chris Bassett, the National Director of Content and Editorial Standards for Global News. I also want to thank editor Craig Jarin and our production assistant Ryan Robinson for their work on this episode. You can reach me on Twitter at Nancy Hixt, on Facebook at Nancy Hixt Crime Beat, and I would love to have you join me for added content on Instagram at nancy.hixt. That's nancy.hixt. Thanks again for listening. Please join me next time.